Okay, this is workshop 2 for community justice innovation. Before we get started with the main part of the workshop, I'll just briefly show you the results of the workshop, the survey from last week. To the right one, yes. I was trying to find a way that I could sort of dump it as a document, but I haven't been able to. So what I might do is just to give you the direct link to view the survey. All right, so we had 19 responses, which was a good, healthy number of responses. Looked at the different formats, and the standard 2-hour weekly was by far the most popular, so we will stick with that. Small caveat on that is these workshops have been designed to have like 100 participants with the breakout into breakout rooms and reporting back and all that stuff as part of them. And since we've only got enough people for sort of one group generally, we probably we'll go through the material a lot quicker. Which does mean if you want to talk about other things for the rest of the 2 hours, that's perfectly fine with me. But I'm not going to try and drag out the material for longer than is needed just to fill the time up, if you know what I mean. All right. The question on the assessment task, whether people wanted an abstract or a more specific scenario. A lot of people wanted some more details. So what I've done in Teams is actually get in the right team, is I've created a channel called Our Town, which is hopefully shared with everyone, where people can start suggesting ideas, and we can just sort of, as a group, build the background and the scenario and what happened. And then in a couple of weeks' time, I will aggregate it into a whole scenario. I think it's going to be more interesting if other people also contribute ideas to it, rather than me just sort of treading out the same old thing again. Things like the name of the town. And the one thing I've suggested is like an old rundown shopping centre that's a crime zone. But anything else that you can think of that you've gotten from your criminology studies, chuck it in there, discuss it, and we'll put a scenario together out of the best ideas. And I'm trying to figure out how to. I don't think I can change the screen I'm sharing, so I've got to stop sharing and then share across. So here we are. We've got the team for community justice innovation. There's general questions, and then there's a channel down here that says Our Town. And there's some, and I'll post some questions and things there as well. But please chuck in ideas. It's more fun if we do it as a collaborative process. The other thing I did want to mention about Teams is if you want to get notifications when someone's posted something, including me, you have to have your channel set to get notifications. Now, this used to be set by default to get notifications. Some genius in IT's decided to uncheck all those so that by default you don't get any notifications of anyone posting anything, let alone if I was to post something very important in Teams. Now, if I am going to post something that's crucial, I also send out as an email, so you're not going to miss out completely. But I did notice that in one of the other groups where people were chatting all the time, I wasn't getting any notification of it. So if after each of the channels, you go to more options, channel notifications, and what did we set here by default is all new posts is set to off. So what you need to go into there is notifications in banner and feed, and I've put including replies, and then you'll actually get notifications. Now, I'm not sure if you get email notification for that. You don't, they seem to have turned that off entirely, but at least your little icon at the bottom of the screen, that's your Teams icon, will have a little notification on it when someone has added something to one of your teams. So pointlessly technical thing, but it did fool me for a little bit because I thought there was no traffic on these teams, and in fact there was. Okay, so let's stop and go back into the survey. So yes, most people were keen on having some more details. And again, you don't need to address the details or facts in any firm way, but it's going to be something that some people find easier to manage, and makes the experience seem more concrete rather than just hypothetically talking about things. Okay, in terms of forms of interaction, surprisingly, this is the only group. 10 out of 19 said they wanted the traditional Zoom where everyone has their cameras on and everyone talks. There aren't 10 people here today. We've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people here today. So I don't know whether the people who want the full-on chat experience are the people who are not here, and then they just want to get the benefit of everyone else's chat. I don't know. Virtual whiteboard was also quite popular, and that might be the way we'll go, because I'm quite happy for people to have their camera on and to intercede and talk and everything else. I'm perfectly happy with that, but I'm being a bit more realistic about that. If we have got the whiteboard on and you do feel as though you're trying to get my attention and I'm not noticing you, and you want to say something, use the raise hand, and that'll give me a ding that someone wants to chat. So that's quite easy. All right. So that's the responses. I will find a way of sending you the link to that. Okay. As I said, I thought it was an easy thing just to export it as a document, but it doesn't seem to be anymore. Okay. Whiteboards. Who can share when someone else is sharing? Share. Whiteboard. So that'll load up. That'll give us something something to look at during the workshop. Now, what will do is, there was a good suggestion I think Stephanie made last week of starting with the review questions from the previous week, since Mass has written them all up, and we'll start with those, and whatever your preferred mode of interaction is, if you want to yell out or you want to use chat. No, I don't know how to open.
Just so you know, I didn't do review questions for week 1 because we didn't actually discuss community justice per se.
Yep, they're in the notes though, so we can just chat through these.
Okay.
So there should be stuff that it's just sort of basic stuff from the readings. So question 1, and this is so broad, it's going to be impossible to find a definitive answer to it, but by all means have a go. What is community justice? So anyone want to have a go at a rough and ready definition? What makes it different? Try and move my toolbar. Got a contribution coming up here, but it's under my, here we go. Community involvement in the justice system. Yep. Focusing on crime prevention. Yep. And I think that's, you know, that's a pretty good start. We've got a involvement of people other. I mean, however we end up defining community, it's people other than your professional criminal justice people. And as we go further in the term, we'll find out it can be quite problematic to define who community is. But we've definitely got a wider idea than just old-fashioned police, corrections, and lawyers and courts. There is a focus on crime prevention. It's not all crime prevention, but there is definitely a focus on that as an outcome, rather than, you know, the old ideas of retribution and so on. And it emphasizes restorative practices where the goal is to repair the harm caused by criminal behavior. All right, so let me see if I can. Where's my movie button? Move, that's the select. Where's my hand? Just excuse me while I mutter to myself during this. That's right click. Community justice takes a different approach to crime through use of community rather than the conventional system. Yep, all good definitions. Let's jump on to the second review question. Why are community justice initiatives important? We've answered some of that by those answers before, but it's a kind of a more concise. What is it important? I mean, it's a leading question, isn't it? Clearly, and you think it's of some importance because you're doing this as an elective, but why do you think it's important? And if you guys are in a position that using the chat window is easier, I can just copy out what you've put in. I can put in chat. If you're on a device that's not as easy to access. So we've got a couple of comments here. It's important because it helps repair the harm caused, strengthen the community ties, and address the root causes of crime. So it's an entirely new way of really thinking about the criminal justice process and trying to think about harm in a broader social sense, rather than harm just being something that is suffered by the state, by government, or by the king. And it's also important because it provides a rationale for involving victims. And I think, as we talked about last week, there was already a move towards recognizing the role of victims. And this came about in a parallel, in a way that sort of helped us understand and explain, and had a sort of a hook to hang that idea of victims on. Because many of the early attempts to involve victims ended up being kind of just as exploitative as the old system. You'd have victim impact statements, and victims would be brought into court and be brought in and said, okay, tell us how bad it feels to be a victim. But the victims still didn't really necessarily have anything to gain from the process, except for maybe a bit of a catharsis. Okay, another comment. Oops. Try from the chat. Provides alternatives to prison that could rehabilitate defendant, break the cycle. and allow the victim to get some belief that they're not just forgotten in the process. Yeah. All right, and the third question, which is like one we could spend years discussing, but just in terms of the simple answer is, how are social innovation, design thinking, and systems thinking important? How, or it might be more of a question of why rather than how. It's interesting waiting for these things to appear when you get half the window and seeing what's the first word actually going to be. Oops. I did not mean to draw an arrow. Trying to get that first word. But the first comment, even though I'm having difficulty getting everyone to work together, social cohesion. Yeah, so the first thing about just using different ideas and different ways of thinking is a participation focus. And I think that's one of the most important things. Is the old approaches to thinking about justice are very much the expert approach, where you say we've got experts in the field, they have a social role, social authority, and that ties them, and we hand over the whole thing to them, and we give them the responsibility for this, and it becomes very hard for people to participate as lay people, because it's all technical language and everything else. So the emphasis of a lot of these processes is to try and find ways of getting people to be able to participate. So design thinking in particular is about getting the people for whom something is for whom's benefit something is done involved in the process and involved in a discussion in a way that equalizes the power imbalance between them and the so-called experts. The second point I think is also good in terms of providing fresh, holistic approaches to complex problem solving. We've had a couple of 100 years of punishing people in the hope that punishing them will, for whatever rationale, stop them committing crime. And it's time to look at new ways of problem solving and new ways of thinking about those. So that's good. We're on board for the material covered in that first module. We just move on up to the challenges for module 2. Can start on challenge 1 there. Before that, if we've got any questions. Time to answer them. Oh, we've got one more comment. I think these whiteboards should be accessible once the session is over too. They should be. So I will check that out, and if they are, I will include the links in Moodle. So if you want to go back and have a look at these. Sorry, Robin, I missed your comment in chat. But another reason why these new ways of thinking are important is means of introducing new ideas rather than repeating the same old cycles over and over again. All right, okay. So on to workshop 2. Up to challenge 1. A nice bold. Oh, excuse me. So challenge 1 is a scenario involving a justice issue. And what we're talking about here is the different ways you could characterize this scenario, this crime or wrong or damage or harm, whichever sort of different way you want to think about it, as opposed through 2 lenses. One is the traditional justice system, which for this situation we're calling retributive justice. I mentioned I'm not entirely, let's call it traditional justice, because there's lots of other things tied in traditional justice rather than just retribution. There's also deterrence. There's also ideas of rehabilitation, but it's the traditional idea where it's locked very much in the police, courts, corrections environment. And then we'll compare it to some of the restorative justice ideas and how this scenario turns out looking a little bit different. Okay, so the first one is, I'm going to say traditional justice, just because I'm a legal theory pedant. And I want to acknowledge that it's not just retribution. Apart from the media, retribution is really one of the lowest objectives, least utilized as objectives in the justice system. Deterrence is much more often used, even though our data on deterrence ain't great, as I'm sure you've done in criminology previously somewhere along the line. The fact that most people who commit crimes aren't deterred, obviously, because they've committed the crimes, and changing the severity of punishment doesn't seem to alter deterrence. Except there is a kind of a threshold deterrence that if there's no penalty at all, then most people will do something if there's no penalty for it. But as soon as there's even a mild penalty, that stops most people. Anyway, that's crim theory for you. So let's start with the first part of this scenario. So hopefully you've read the scenario. There's Sarah who's had her laptop stolen. The residential advisor, Harry, sees the laptop on Tom's desk. And Tom admits that he's taken the laptop from Sarah's room. So what rule or law has been broken?
So Gabby and I agree there's a breaking and entering and theft.
Mm-hmm.
And is violation a law?
Well, it might not be a law, but certainly there are rules around privacy.
Yeah.
Who has breached privacy?
Tom, yeah. The thief.
Yeah. What about Harry?
Well, no, the door was open and he walked past the room.
And he looked in the room?
Well, I'm going to look in a room if the door's open. I think it's a natural human instinct.
Let's have another. It just says he happened to see it on Tom's desk. We don't get the full. It doesn't say he happened to be walking past. He could have just happened to be poking around in Tom's room.
Or he could have been Tom's roommate.
He's an advisor though, so I don't think.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. This is obviously come from an American context because we don't have very many students who live in residences in Australia. Mm. Whereas in America, it's pretty much the dominant model for unis. So yeah, I'm presuming he doesn't. Like, this is not a major part of the scenario, but it just occurred to me that at some point that there's like, well, what was Harry doing in that room? Like, was he in there talking to Tom and he noticed it, or Is he someone who just pokes around the students' rooms, or is there rules around that? So,
That's if it was a bit of trespassing rather than the breaking, he's still breaking in the first part, but because he went in that room,
so I think we've got like two sort of types of issues. There's the property issues. There's actually another one as well. Property issues in terms of the laptop. We've got, let's just say, trespass / privacy. And here it doesn't really matter whether it's a formal law punishable by the courts, or it's just one of the social, or it's a privacy law. We don't really have, we have information privacy laws, but we don't really have privacy laws per se at the moment. But there is that issue of the being in someone else's space without their permission. There's at least one other that I can see that's a set of rules. Where we've seen why did Tom take the laptop? Did he take it to sell it? Did he take it because Sarah has better games on her laptop than he does?
or was she working on a similar assignment?
Yeah. So we've got an academic sort of academic honesty style rules there. That's pretty much what I can tell from the scenario as it's written. This is a really challenging question, but you'll never get this one. But who did it? Tom.
Yes.
I don't think that's a very hard one. And the third question is, how should it be punished? Now, one thing I think is worth pointing out here, that's kind of important to criminal law, is that one act can break multiple rules. I know it sort of goes without saying, but it's worth remembering that sometimes a series of offences aren't individual. They're not like three different actions. One action can constitute multiple things. And you can have, break multiple sets of rules and laws. And when we're looking at things like property and the trespass ones, they're also both criminal law and civil law. There's a number of the sort of foundational, fundamental criminal laws like assault and trespass, nuisance, that are also actions under criminal law, which is often occasionally, not often when you see when people are acquitted, because the criminal standard of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. But if they go to the civil trial, not only is the standard of proof lower, it's the balance of probabilities, but also there is usually a compensation for the person who suffered the harm. So you'll have people who get I think it was O.J. Simpson, I think, was acquitted of the criminal laws, but was found civilly responsible. And then, the people the victims or the victim's family can then sue for wrongful death or whatever under the civil system. So yeah, we end up with these things that are have multiple forums in which they can be addressed. Back in the old days, before 1855, in the British legal system, there were even two sets of courts. There was the equity courts and the King's courts, and the equity courts were run by the church, and the King's courts were run by the king. and they had different remedies. They could offer different things, and you had to make a choice when you were going to sue someone as to which set of courts you'd go to. Talk about confusing. And to be even more confusing, we've ended up with a mishmash. I think it's 1855, they merged the two courts together, but there's two sets of precedents, and there's all sorts of remedies that are only available through one tradition or the other that we've kind of squished together. So the idea that justice is just about one forum and going to one court is not even true now. Has been less true in the past, and it's something we do have to consider. That in this scenario, at least, we've got the university and possibly even two. The college probably has its own rules. The university has its own rules. We've got the criminal law, and if Sarah had access to enough money to get a lawyer, she could have access to civil law as well. So we've got lots and lots of different contrasting fora. I think that's the correct word.
So Tom could be subject to the criminal laws, but he also could be subject to the uni laws or wherever it is that he is. They might have their own. That means that he might be kicked out because he did it, even though.
Yeah, and as I said, the college probably has its own rules as well. So the whole, he's not going to be kicked out of uni for going into another student's room necessarily, unless there's a specific code or charter or whatever. But the college is probably going to have rules about how you conduct yourself when you're in the residential college. And that might have a snowball effect, because your enrollment at the uni might be subject to good behavior in the college. So if you get reported and you get, let's say, convicted, for want of a better word, for the behavior in the college, then that might jeopardize your enrollment, even though you haven't actually broken one of the university rules. It might have a flow-on effect. There's probably no one here who's in who's in a residential college who could let us know what the answer to that is. So you do get interactions between those systems. And some professional bodies have rules on whether you can get admitted to that profession, and they're often require you to report misconduct that you were part of as a student. So again, there's you're not getting, it's not a justice process that like they'll come after you. The admission board won't come after you for doing something wrong, but if you later on go and trying to be admitted, lawyers are definitely like this. Not sure about medicine, not sure about psychology, but it may well be that there are things that if you go for admission as a psychologist, that you have to notify them of things that you've done, and if you don't, you can be struck off. You can have your application removed, and if you've lied about it, you can be struck off. So I don't know. You guys might have done. Some of you guys are psychology students. You might have done the professional ethics stuff in psychology, and you'll know better than me whether there's things you can do to stop you being a psychologist. Probably hope there is, really. There was a number of high-profile cases in law with students who were done for plagiarism at uni and then never reported it on admission, who had their admission revoked later on. And they, had said, we didn't know we had to report. And the famous one was actually a student who had been found guilty of plagiarism on a business studies subject. It wasn't even a law subject, and he still had his approval for acting as a solicitor revoked because he had not mentioned that. So yes, professional. Let me just get back into this. You may find at least you can do this on a virtual whiteboard. It's much harder to do on an old-fashioned whiteboard. You may find that, just assuming Tom is a psychology student, that he might have further penalties involved down the track. And it may be that if you fess up and say, look, when I was a student, I did this, then admission boards will give you the benefit of the doubt. I know there are people who have been convicted of offences who have been admitted as lawyers, even though they have served jail time for offences. But that's because they came clean and have, explained that it won't affect their professional ethics as a lawyer. But definitely hiding them is a bad thing. So that was a little side trip, but I think it's important because we are talking about the way in which these interlocking rule systems work with each other. Let's get back to the how should it be punished? What do you guys think?
So because we had just read all of the restorative justice, my answer is return the laptop, make remunerations or amends. But then I was also thinking, because she was late for her assessment, I mean, that falls on her for doing it the night before, but also there'd be that mental anguish, I suppose, as well.
Yep.
I don't know how one would
We're just,
make up for that.
yeah. Well, we'll dig, then the second part, we'll dig deeper into the restorative aspects. So we'll come back to it and look at more of that, what the restorative part means. But we'll say at the moment, we just want to look at, in terms of those different authority systems, the courts, the criminal law, the rules of the college, the rules of the uni. How do you think Tom should be punished?
I would think more through I know it's, stealing or whatever you want to say, but to me, it more through the college, because there could be good reasons behind, we don't know his reason behind stealing. Could have been a joke for all we know. So, as at a college, investigate to take course of action. If they find it to be some criminal element behind it, then they can, refer to police to charge.
So let's use a bit of a legally term. Let's talk about the sort of the malice. We're looking at what his intentions are. Because there is also, like, he was in her room without permission. There's all sorts of other stuff tied into there that's not about the laptop.
It was on Tom's desk. It doesn't mean that Tom put it there either, for that matter.
Well, that's true too. That's true. No, he confessed to it.
Did I read that?
Yeah, it does say he confessed to it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean he did it. He might have been pressured by someone else to confess.
Could have been a joke. That's what I said. It might have been a joke or something.
Yeah. So there's a couple of levels. So there's one is the like, is it just a way of getting an assignment? Getting credit for an assignment? Is it a property crime in terms of, this laptop is worth $2,000 and he's taken this property that's worth $2,000? But there's also this high level of, we've got a guy who's been into a young woman's dorm room without her permission or knowledge. That opens up a whole series of other questions about what's going on there, particularly in terms of danger and the kind of feelings of threat. So when we talked about trespass here and privacy, the trespass could be just a means to getting the laptop, but the laptop could just be a side issue in terms of the the actual purpose, which is lurking around in a young woman's room, whatever.
Because he could have hacked the laptop to like record her and send things to his phone and things like that.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of potential stuff that we don't have the facts for, because we don't really have the facts for anything. But in terms of the breach here, I think we've got a sense where the victim is more vulnerable than usual. If it was another guy, that doesn't rule out him having creepy reasons for being there, of course. Equal opportunity creeping and everything else, but it is more likely that a young woman is going to experience the feeling of being victimized much more strongly. And that's likely to come out in the traditional justice approach. But the question of emotional damage isn't really a big part of our legal system. It's more of a part of the American system because damages get awarded by juries in America. So we have the capability of awarding emotional damage, but usually that's only happens where there's only emotional damage and something is really, really bad. Like the original case where this came through was where someone observed a terrible traffic accident and saw some pedestrians getting killed. So that person didn't actually suffer any kind of damage, but they got a really awful traumatic incident that affected them emotionally because they saw some pedestrians being mowed down by a car. And that was like the original English case that kicked it all off. But those things are reasonably rare. So where you see they got $5 million for emotional damage, that is generally in American cases. That's because juries get to decide damages and they're almost always appealed and reduced dramatically on appeal. They go to an appeal and the appeal court goes, yeah, okay, you didn't suffer $1 million. It's $5,000, $10,000 emotional damage. So quick briefing on emotional damage, which is important when we come to the next part, because we don't really compensate people that much for things that are not fixed economic damage in our system. Apart from some real outliers like hate crime. And that's let's not go on that on a tangent. If anyone wants to talk about that as a tangent, happy to do it at some other point. But hate crime is one of those few things that is pretty much all emotional damage that we invert our normal rules system around, which creates some kind of challenges for the legal system. All right, let's hit the restorative justice questions. Restorative justice. And as we will see, restorative processes ask different sorts of questions. So what happened? I might just put these all down because they're interlinked. Who was affected? I think that should be effected. No. I can't tell my affected from my effected, so I'll leave it what Mas has got there. What can be done to repair the harm? So these are a different set of questions. So we can probably focus on the first two primarily. What happened and who was affected? Leaving rules out of it.
So what happened is that Sarah's laptop went missing and Harry found it in Tom's room.
Yep. And how was Sarah affected?
Well, she had to get an extension on her assessment.
Yep. And she lost use of her laptop.
Lost use of her laptop. Being a female, I would imagine she felt violated.
Yep. Yep. Who else was affected in a harmful way by those actions? Thinking more abstract here.
I'm assuming you're hinting at Tom, but I couldn't tell you why.
With his reputation.
Sorry, I missed the second point.
I said, I don't know if his reputation would get damaged. I mean, it's only a very minor thing that he did, but still, I don't know.
It could be, and also it may not be terribly minor. If it gets out that Tom's a sex pest who's prowling around all the women's rooms, I think that could be quite a significant amount of damage. Now, depending on why he was doing it, he might deserve that. But if he was just panicking at the last minute and thought, "Oh, Sarah's always got the answer," Sarah never secures her laptop with a password or biometrics. I can just borrow her laptop and copy her assignment. He's also in danger of then being Tom the sex pest, Tom the creep, you know. Now he's got no one to blame but himself for that, really. But when you're saying about Tom's reputation being harmed, yes, if he is innocent of all the creepy sex stuff, that people will. I don't know about you guys. Maybe I'm just like a very negative, suspicious person. But if you were living on dorm and that had happened, you know, I think you'd be more likely to lock your door and to be really wary about guys around the girls' dorms. So
He could be labeled as like a cheater, and so when he hands in assessments and stuff from now on, professors and lecturers will be suspicious if it's actually his work or if he's stolen it from someone else.
yes, and other students may not want to do group work with him. So there are reputational aspects that come out of this for Tom as an outcome. That are consequences, and if we are not using the rule breaking model of traditional justice, we're just looking at what happened rather than who is responsible for what happened. We can draw things out more broadly. I mean, there's a kind of an argument that I'm not totally convinced of, that all the students who honestly did their assignment are victims of him cheating. I find that kind of spurious, but people often use that kind of argument that what about all the honest students who didn't cheat on the assignment? They're all being victimized by the fact that he could have potentially gotten a pass for the assignment without actually doing the work. I think that's way too vague and insubstantial, but people do bring that up quite often in terms of, you know, I was honest and I did the assignment or the work and I'm been victimized by this. And it's like, well, you stay in your lane. You did the assignment, you did the work, you learned something from it. You know, it's really nothing to do with you. I understand people feeling peeved about that, but I do also think that that fails. Like, you wouldn't want to have to mediate with people who felt aggrieved over something like that. All right. So how is this approach different? How are these two approaches different?
Well, the first one takes legal action, and the second one is more human focused. Our emotions and feelings, they're the same thing. Yeah, more human focused.
Yes. It's focused on needs and reasons, I think, more. Whereas the first model is very much you broke the rules. And that's fundamentally what this is about. It's about the rules being broken. The second one is much more likely to talk about, well, what is Tom's situation that he's resorting to stealing a laptop? Is there some other way that we can actually get Tom back on track and avoid it all becoming public and people thinking he's a pervert and everything else? Because there's something going on that Tom feels as though he has to cheat to answer the assignment.
Tom's a scholarship kid, and his laptop died, and he couldn't find another one.
Yeah, there could be all kinds of reasons. And some of them are still things that could be quite culpable. I mean, just the fact that he didn't do the work, and, you know, left at the last minute and then panicked under the old sort of traditional justice model is very backward looking. It's going, well, you broke the rules, you knew what you were doing, you broke the rules. Whereas the restorative model is much more, well, how can we stop this sort of thing happening in the future? Yeah, he did the wrong thing. He fessed up to it. And that's something that's very important. He actually, when confronted, confessed. He didn't wait until it got proven. Although, you know, he probably had no choice once the laptop was there with the sticker on it. But how can we get Tom back on track? Does he need extra study support? Is there study support out there that he's not taking advantage of? I mean, CQU has the student advice group. I'm trying to remember the name of the service.
Studiosity.
Studiosity. Thank you very much for that. Almost no one uses it. They're constantly heading out for work and saying, you know, can you at least remember what we're called? Can you promote it to students, because there's no one is using these services. And yet students are consistently saying, I'm finding it really hard. Everything's too hard. I can't cope with the workload. I'm too stressed, and so on. So that's, you know, that be what that is for CQU. What does that mean for Tom? You know, if there is a similar service available for Tom and he's not using it, why isn't he using it? How can we encourage him to use it to actually learn how to do things? So
I find that people don't know that they're out there.
yeah. And people say, oh, but it's on Moodle. And it's like, yeah, and so is 10,000 words of other guff. So is all the rules for international students when your course doesn't have any international students in it, and all the rest of it. And I also think people, and I include myself in this, are very wary of doing extra work or something that looks like extra work, even if it looks like help. People are often very, very, very bad at asking for help. That's me all over. And, you know, could consider it, you know, a really shameful thing to do, to go and to ask, you know, the Studiosity people for help, which is kind of interesting because, you know, it's more shameful than stealing, which you'd think would be a more deeply seated set of beliefs, but maybe not. Maybe there are all sorts of other reasons. So yeah, we don't have to come to we've come to the end of this session, this part of the session anyway. We don't have to find an answer to that, but I think it's important to look at the different sorts of questions you're asking and the different sorts of outcomes that you're looking to get out of this. You know, if it goes to court, Tom and Sarah are never going to talk to each other again. You know, it's going to, the conflict is going to get so reinforced that these people are going to be lifelong enemies, most likely. However, a restorative process, Sarah may actually, you know, Tom may have the opportunity to give an apology and do it sincerely, and Sarah may actually be able to mend their relationship if they had one beforehand. You don't necessarily expect it's going to happen, but there is at least that potential there.
I thought it was when I read it, I thought to myself, it's a bit of a clumsy attempt at it because he left the tree hug sticker on it.
Yeah.
But most people would pull that sticker off to try to compute it. So I just thought to myself, you know, there was something more going on when I read it, because it's like a hearted attempt.
Yeah, and he confesses it to it pretty quickly.
Also, he left it out in the open on his desk.
Wouldn't
you try and hide it?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a bit of a self-sabotaging side to it. Now, under the conventional system, Sarah may never even get to know any of that stuff. All Sarah may find out is that there's a dude who's been in her room without her being there, who's been going through her stuff. So in fact, the system may actually victimize her more than Tom has, because her imagination is going to start ticking over. Well, how often has he been in here? What's he done? What if he comes back? What if there are other people that do it? So the system itself can actually create victimization in the traditional model. All right, we'll build on that. Let's take a 15-minute break, get a cup of tea, comfort stop and everything else, and be back at 10 minutes past. Okay, the second challenge, which seems like a shorter challenge, but we'll see how we go, is to start thinking about a definition of restorative justice. Obviously, there's been a few definitions around, a few ideas out there about how to define it, but to actually go through the process of coming up with a personal definition, which is always, I think, a really useful thing to do when you're starting to investigate a new area, or study a new area, is to start with what you think it is, and then keep that in mind, particularly at the end of term, to come back and to look at how your attitude's changed. So people might have quite strong opinions about what restorative justice is, might have very not strong opinions at all about it. It'd be very interesting to see at the end of term whether you end up in the same position. So when starting a definition, the worst place to start is with like the first word of the definition. You really want to start with what you think the key elements are. And we've covered a little bit of that before, but if we could just try and revisit that now. What do you guys think are the key elements of restorative justice as we've discussed it so far?
I think victim involvement, community involvement, and offender taking responsibility for their actions and learning there are consequences for their actions.
Yeah, okay, so victim in. And I'm going to not even sarcastically say offender involvement, because offenders aren't really that involved in the traditional system. They just get to sit there and get, you know, told what's happening to them. And if they do want to speak, their lawyers will probably advise them not to. I know I would if I was a lawyer. In a criminal case, because that's what you know, the offender can very rarely do anything but damage themselves in a process. So yeah, we do look a bit at the victim involvement. But one thing we look at less so is the way in which the offender is also removed effectively from the equation in the old system. Yeah, I remember it's probably bad taste to use Donald Trump as an example after he's just been shot at, but I remember people were scandalized that Trump was sleeping through his prosecution at various points. But you know, there's nothing for the offender to do. Just sit there and listen to what goes on and hope that your lawyers are going to do the right thing by you. Now, I don't think I would be falling asleep in a jury trial. I don't think that'd be a good look, but I think it did illustrate just how little there is for an offender to do in a trial. They plead guilty or not guilty at the start, as advised by their lawyer. And then the rest of the process is just sitting there.
And they shouldn't smile, Scott, and they should keep a neutral.
You shouldn't give a creepy smile. You shouldn't smile and make it look like you're having a relaxed time. You shouldn't.
Or you shouldn't smirk or pull, you know, you have your face expressions are quite important.
And it's a long process.
To do anything, you're not meant to. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it is, if you think about it, it's a very weird, you know how we got there, but it's a very weird process. And possibly when the law was less complex and it didn't take as long, it wasn't as weird, but as the law has gotten more and more complex, there's more and more days of just sitting there. And, you know, one of the things that law school didn't teach me about, cool. Just moving that over. Is like how long it takes to get chain of custody into evidence, which does no one really any good until there's the rare case where there's a problem with the chain of custody and the defense counsel really need to know that the bloodstained knife was not in anyone's custody for 12 minutes, during which someone could have interfered with it. Almost never happens, but you do spend an awful lot of time in court going, and what did you do with the plastic bag? Well, I handed it to Bob. Okay, let's call him Bob. What did Bob do with the plastic bag? Well, he put it in a box and handed it over to Jane. Okay, let's call Jane in and see what happened. Chain of evidence is, in most cases, incredibly tedious. I don't think it's always tedious, but in most cases, it doesn't even make much difference. But it's something that has to be done. And that the last comment, thank you, whoever put that there, in terms of understanding causes and effects of crime. You know, it's a deeper understanding for everyone. It's particularly important that the offender understands the effects the crime has on the victim. But it's often important that the victim also understands that the cause, you know, because victims understandably go through a whole lot of catastrophizing and dark fantasizing about things that could have happened, things that might have happened. And you hear it like even with where people are not heavily victimized. So someone sets off a car alarm in the street and people are immediately on social media going, it's only the fact that I wasn't in the car, that I wasn't killed and eaten by a cannibal, kind of things. And people love to build it up. But that's a sort of a natural human quality. And one of the benefits of restorative justice is that often the victims will see the offenders as being less scary than they think they are. And they usually are less scary than you imagine them to be. I haven't heard of a case where someone has gone, well, I was feeling all right about being a victim, and then I saw the guy and I thought, oh God, no. I really, you know, I guess it might theoretically happen, mightn't it? All right, any other elements that we think are important for our initial?
Did we also think of, you know, things like or an element to me was that, you know, that you know, you communicate, you've got to be able to communicate between you both and what you want to get. Like, do you know, do you want an apology? You know, do you want, some people need to forgive that person to move on.
Yep.
I need to forgive them or I'll never get over it. And so I went to the restorative and I was able to forgive them because I understood their circumstances and it shed a new light. Is that part of the elements or?
Yeah, I'm going to break that into two things. One is that communication is important. And the other is that it's outcomes focused. Let's say outcomes / future focused. Oh, God, wish I had a keyboard that could spell. Even then, that's wrongly spelled. Put an extra S in there. Okay, so the first part, and this is a benefit and a critique, is that rather than it being about, you know, proving facts like a traditional model, it's about communicating between people and getting people talking to each other. As we have mentioned, I have not mentioned yet, but it's coming up. This is the problem of recording the videos early, is that I get them out of sync. It's coming up in one of the modules were coming up because I've done the intro video for it. One of the critiques of this process is that often the offenders are young and not really able to communicate well or engage in the process, and may be overwhelmed by the process because they can't really communicate, because, you know, they're young people, brains are not fully formed and all the rest of it. So put a pin in that because we're going to come back to it. But that's sometimes seen as one of the negatives, is that it can look like everyone's being very fair and everyone's having their say and whatever in the process, but it may well be that the offender in particular is being sort of pushed, wouldn't go as far as saying bullied, but being pushed into a certain set of outcomes that might not be in their interest. And I'd say the same thing could apply to the victims as well. Okay, so the second point that you made, it was also good, is that it is very outcomes future focused. It's less about you should be punished because you're a bad person and you've done a bad thing. And it's much more focused on them. Well, what does the victim need going forward? What's going to actually stop the offender reoffending? How can we put those things into place? And how, as far as it is possible, the past is important, and that we try and fix things and restore things as far as the past is involved. But we're also focused on that future, which the conventional system is less focused on, except that maybe it'll, you know, a severe enough punishment will deter someone from committing crime in the future, or may deter others. There's a whole, oh God, this is endless, painful argument in jurisprudence, which is legal theory, around what's called general deterrence, about whether it is ever permissible to punish someone in order to deter other people, because you're technically punishing them for something they haven't done, but for something someone else might do, if that makes sense. So special deterrence is if we inflict some kind of pain on you, then you're less likely to do that thing in future because you're going to be afraid of the pain that you'll suffer as a consequence. So it's very much about yourself. And a conventional justice model says that's fine because it's all about you and what you've done. But where people say, but it will also deter other people, we then get that problem. And it's a pretty insoluble one of, is it ever fair to punish you for something that someone else might do? And let you think about that one.
Isn't it a deterrent so that someone else won't commit the same offence because they think, oh, well, I might get this harsher punishment if I commit it?
Yeah, that's the argument.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're actually then punishing someone not for what they have done, you're punishing them for what someone else might do. It becomes more apparent. I'll give you an example of where it's more apparent. When there is an influx or raise in a crime rate around something. So it was raised in terms of mugging when mugging became a thing. And it became a much bigger thing than it was. And it was a lot of mythology around mugging that wasn't true. But there was a lot of sentencing that was done to punish someone because mugging had become such a popular thing. So, you know, what's ordinarily called mugging, which is just robbery, just robbing someone in the street, whatever, there was X penalty that you usually give. But because everyone's doing it at the moment, and there's this perception that there's an epidemic of mugging, we're going to give you an extra hard punishment to deter other people from doing it. So that's a situation where if you'd done it a year ago, you'd have one penalty, but now because other people are doing it, and because there's a potential of people doing it in the future, you're getting a more severe penalty than you would have fairly gotten in that circumstance. I know you're probably not terribly excited by these arguments, but something has to keep the jurisprudence people occupied.
Does make sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're just never going to get to the end of that. You know, I don't think there's a bottom to that argument.
Formulate and do the crime and you have to do the time.
Well, the one that fortunately is less prevalent at the moment, that was a big one when I was studying, was punishing for people for things that they might do in the future. And there were a number of people who got I don't think there was one in New South Wales, maybe one in Victoria, one in the UK. So there's a small number of people who got these preventative detention punishments because they'd done one thing, but they felt that they were so dangerous they had to be kept in custody longer because of things that they might do. And there was a huge public outcry around those, and it sort of fizzled out eventually. And it doesn't seem to have become a thing, fortunately. But that was, again, a significant problem with this idea of, like, if you're being punished for what you've done, being punished for what you might do. It's the what's the Spielberg film?
I don't know, but people go to jail and learn how to be better criminals, so that seems counterproductive to me.
It is. Minority Report. Minority Report is the one that you get punished for things that the computers say you've got a chance of committing. But yeah, and the flip side of it is, once people go into custody, their recidivism rates go up. So
there's a criminology theory there too, but I can't remember what it is.
Yeah. And then people always pull out the death penalty and say, well, the death penalty is, you know, the ultimate deterrent. They won't be committing crimes again. But there's again been extensive data gathered because the US states are always introducing, getting rid of, reintroducing death penalty. And all the comparative data shows that where there is a death penalty, there's always higher rates of violent crime. And as soon as they remove the death penalty, violent crime drops. And it's called the grim irony of the death penalty. And no one has a clear explanation for it. But a lot of people say that if you're in the political environment where people tolerate the death penalty, then your society is already in a bad way. And then if you're in a position where you revoke a death penalty, it means your society is becoming, you know, more understanding and accepting and more sophisticated. And that means that other means of crime prevention are working. There's also a kind of an argument where if you've got death penalties for reasonably minor offences, you might as well kill all the witnesses because you're not going to get anything worse. So if you're going to rob a bank, you might as well kill a few witnesses on the way out, because you're already going to get the death penalty for bank robbery, which you may or may not, depending where you are. But if you're already facing the death penalty, then why not? What's the danger of killing a few witnesses and then they can't identify you later? So all sorts of, stuff around that too. And I think the total failure around deterrence theory, this is not an unnecessary side trip, but I think it really informs what we're doing in terms of restorative justice. Because I think we've ended up in such a morass around deterrence that is we know it doesn't work as deterrence, but we don't really know what will work as deterrence on a big scale. But what we can try and then is zoom in on individuals and look at individuals and say, well, what can we do to stop this individual person? And it may not be deterrence in terms of pain. It may be, rehabilitation. It may be solving other problems. It may be all sorts of other solutions. All right, I'm going to return to much more of that. How do we turn this into a definition? I'll ring Masa up. Masa, how do we turn this into a definition? I guess what we need to do is try and find some way of incorporating all those elements, and not just have a list of them. We could say restorative justice is something that it involves victim involvement, blah, 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 and just run through the list. But how can we try and structure that into something that makes more sense is a much more difficult proposition. So let's have a go. Because I've got I don't know what you guys can say. I can move it. I can move it. So restorative justice is ... alternative way of looking at justice that involves others not generally involved in the traditional system. Offenders, and let's say actively involved, because offenders are involved in the traditional system, but just not very actively. That seeks all by all right, I've just had a go. Restorative justice is an alternative way of looking at justice. I shouldn't use justice twice. That involves others not generally actively involved in the traditional system, victims, community offenders, and that seeks better outcomes via strong communications processes. Helping fix the harm. Yeah, so a way we can tie that into the definition. I mean, we just added it at the end. But is there a way we can tie that in that? Maybe it's in the definition of outcomes. We can put something like.
Well, all the videos in the study guide were very focused on the word harm.
How about we put involving, including. I want to say outcomes. We say involving, including restitution for harm.
Sure.
Does that work? Again, this is not so much a case of coming up with a watertight definition that's brilliant, but it's about the process of thinking through the way definitions are formed. Because often what we'll do is we'll go to the textbook definition and we'll just sort of parrot off what that has to say. But when we come to actually creating our own definition, there's actually a much deeper level of critical thinking that goes into that. So what I've been trying to do is trying to tie all those elements together in a way that makes more sense. Anyway, we can come back to that in week 10 or 11 or whatever, when we get to the end, and see whether our understanding of that changes and evolves. I'm also trying not to impose too many of my own ideas on this, because I've read the materials and I'm already at the end of the course, so it's I don't want to subconsciously push it. All right, our last question is, why is this definition important? I've changed that a little from what Marcia put. Explain why you define it as such, which is, I don't know there's an answer to that from myself. But yeah, why are definitions important? Why is it important to define restorative justice?
Well, from a legal point of view, it's important to have a definition so you know how to find the loopholes.
Well, yeah. Words are important. There are legal parameters around different processes, and having an alternative process set up is going to involve different legal frameworks. So you don't want to end up in a situation where the people who really need to be involved in the system don't get involved in it for one reason or another. Other reasons definitions are important?
Well, and to explain it to somebody, you don't want everyone to have, I mean, people have their ideas, but if you something to explain to them, if you just let anyone explain how their own ideas without some definition, then people might get the wrong understanding, or say, Scott told me it was this or that or something like that. So it's sort of putting that ground base in as to what it is.
Yep, good point. So that sense in which you want to be you're talking apples and apples, not apples and oranges. You want to be able to communicate it to other people and help them understand what it is, but you also want to be clear you're talking about the same sort of thing. And of course, the way the world is, there are so many debates going on between people who are just, talking about something completely different, but they all think they're defining it the same way. So yeah, I think that's an important element. Others? I'm thinking about this myself, because I don't, my work lives and dies by definitions, but it's something you don't really think about. It's just like, oh, we just have to have definitions.
I guess for some people, for the neurospicy people, having a definition helps them understand things a bit better.
Also, like, I think, it's not just for the neurospicy people, but also just like understanding the way normal people think, understanding the way systems think, understanding how systems operate. Because sometimes when you come to it, you sort of go, oh, okay, that's the reason. I don't really think that. And I think neurodiverse people have that experience all the time. They're always seeing stuff and going, okay, so the reason I'm supposed to be doing this? Is that really the reason? But we also get that in terms of from a systemic point of view, that when we look at existing systems and we look at them and we're told, oh, this is to do this for this reason, and like, oh, okay. So in order to understand things, to challenge things, to develop things further, definitions do become really important. And I know there's this idea that a whole lot of packaged ideas in terms of forgiveness, in terms of what an apology is, in terms of what restitution is, even in terms of what retribution is. There's a whole lot of these things that are packed. The technical term we talk about is black boxes, which is like it comes from electronics. I think when you pack a whole lot of electronics in a box that has an input and an output, and you don't know what's in the box, right? we have a lot of systemic things like that when we, and then here in within this system, we talk about forgiveness and we talk about apologies. But what is an apology? What does it mean? Like, you start unpacking all that stuff. I mean, you do then end up with definitions that are pages long because you have to subdefine everything else. But I do think it's important to actually start thinking about the things that we take for granted. Let's put that as a specific thing. Think about what we take for granted. In my other research work, I'm looking at this is a tangent, but I'm going to keep it really short. I'm looking at the assumptions people make that grading as a process, that is ranking students from best to worst, is something that motivates students. And a lot of educators, myself included, just didn't really think about it and didn't really unpack it and went, oh yeah, you've got to give students grades, because then otherwise why would anyone be motivated towards study? And then I've read there's like 50 years of research that says that's not true. And, you know, blew my mind slightly until I thought about it and went, yeah, that is probably true. But you can end up with very simple foundational ideas tied into a system that, if you don't look at it, you don't actually challenge it empirically, everyone just keeps reproducing it. So I'm now very conscious of the whole, you know, grades as motivation discourse is wrong. And also when we're talking at justice, you know, we know that the motivational ideas we think about in terms of, you know, being, you know, told you're wrong by the justice system is going to make you a better person. We know that's really wrong. We've got enough data on that. But we're moving into this new area where we have the danger of replacing this idea about what an apology is. And, you know, a lot of early advocates for restorative justice are like, an apology can be just as powerful and just as important. And the people who are the conventional people go, what? That's not possible. You know, people don't want an apology. Then we have examples of situations where apologies work really well. But we've got that danger of then making that into a new golden rule and saying, well, obviously apologies work. We don't know. We've got some data. We're going to be talking about that next week or the week after. And the data is interesting and it is mixed. So we've got that to look forward to. All righty. We're heading up for the end of session. We happy with? Got the comment that literature reviews are helped with definitions, and then we get the there's a lot of emphasis today on the macro reviews, where you review all the other literature and you try and put it into one framework. Apart from the fact it doesn't cost much money to do, so cynically that's one reason there's a lot of that research done. But I think there is also a real need, because you go into a new field and everyone kind of picks a little piece and they're researching it and they're sort of all going in different directions. There is that need to take that macro level look and saying, okay, what does it all mean when we fit it all together? And sometimes then definitions can be part of that. And you can find that some people are moving in the same direction, they're kind of agreeing, and then you'll find some people are over here and they're just doing something completely by themselves. And they're using the same words you are, but they're doing something completely strange and unusual. All right. If we've got no questions to finish up, give you a little bit of a chance to hit the keyboards or think about where we're going. Otherwise, thank you for your participation this week. I will, I believe, fingers crossed, the whiteboards for each of these Zoom things should be available as separate documents or links or whatever once the process is over. But this is an experiment to see if that happens. And yeah, please let me know if you think that the whiteboard approach, which was the preferred one that everyone mentioned earlier on, if you think that's going to be the way to work, or is a better way to do it, or anything like that. And we'll try and get what you guys, what serves you best out of these workshops. Okay. Catch you all later.
Thanks, Scott.
See you later.